picture this. You're sitting at your desk, just clearing out your inbox, right?
Yeah, the usual Tuesday morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you see a message from someone you really respect in your community.
Yeah.
And they're asking you to join the board of directors for a local charity.
Oh, which always feels great.
Right. Immediately you get that warm, fuzzy feeling. I mean, it sounds like an amazing opportunity. You get to give back. You get to, lend your professional expertise to a cause you genuinely care about.
And let's be honest, there is a certain prestige to it, too.
Oh, totally. Maybe you even get a fancy brass plaque with your name on it in the lobby.
Right.
You think to yourself, hey, this is a great way to do a good deed. But today, we have a very specific mission. We are going to completely shatter the illusion that joining a charity board is just a feel-good volunteer gig.
Yeah, it is remarkably easy to fall into that exact trap. We just naturally associate charities with, benevolence, community spirit.
Doing the right thing.
Exactly. And because you're giving away your time and your talent for free, there's this underlying assumption that the normal, ruthless rules of the corporate world that they simply shouldn't apply to you.
Right, because you're volunteering.
Right. But the reality is entirely different, and in many ways, it's actually far more rigid. So we're looking at the cold, hard, legal realities of being a charity director in Canada.
Which sounds terrifying.
I know, but the goal isn't to scare you away from volunteering. I mean, society desperately needs people to step up.
Absolutely.
But rather, we want to show you exactly where the traps are hidden in plain sight, and how to actually protect yourself while you're trying to do good in the world.
Yeah, because I remember getting asked to join my first board, and I absolutely walked into that first meeting expecting to, drink some lukewarm coffee, look over a glossy brochure, and maybe vote on the color of the napkins for the annual gala.
The fun stuff.
Right. I certainly wasn't expecting to need legal armor, but looking into what the law actually requires on day one, there's this intimidating, heavy term that immediately gets thrown around, which is fiduciary duty.
Oh, yes, the big one.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just nod their heads when they hear it without truly grasping the weight of it.
Huh.
My understanding is that fiduciary duty is essentially the legal obligation to act entirely in the charity's best interest rather than your own.
Yes.
And to make sure the organization is actually doing what it was legally set up to do.
That is the perfect summary, and it truly is the bedrock of a director's legal responsibility. You have to ensure the charity is pursuing its stated purposes.
Right.
And that doesn't mean things that are just sort of adjacent or, vaguely related to the mission.
What do you mean by that?
Well, say your charity was legally established with the specific purpose of protecting local wetlands.
Okay.
You can't suddenly decide to start funding a downtown after-school art program just because the board president thinks it's a wonderful idea.
Oh, wow. Even if it's a good cause.
Even if it's a fantastic cause, that is mission drift, and legally, it is a breach of your duty. You also have a strict obligation to maintain the organization's financial stability.
Right, and that financial stability piece, it isn't just about avoiding outright bankruptcy, is it?
No, not at all.
It's about making sure donor money isn't just, bleeding out through inefficiency or poor management. Which brings up a really uncomfortable reality about how boards actually function.
Yeah, this is where it gets tricky.
Because the biggest shocker for a lot of new directors is the legal requirement to properly hire and supervise management.
Yes, the supervision part is huge.
This is where expectations totally clash with reality. Because, I always assumed the whole point of having an executive director was so the volunteer board didn't have to manage the day-to-day operations.
Right. You just let them run the show.
Yeah. It's kind of like being handed the keys to a school bus, but deciding you just want to sit in the back and, pick the radio station while a teenager actually drives the thing.
That is a phenomenal analogy.
But if the bus crashes, the law doesn't care that you weren't holding the steering wheel. You were the one with the license.
Exactly. That is the exact mechanism of liability. What's fascinating is how often courts and regulators hear that exact defense.
Like, hey, we just lifted to the executive director.
Right. And they are completely unsympathetic to it. A board that restricts itself entirely to, quote-unquote, big picture policy decisions while waving goodbye as the staff does whatever they please. Well, that's not practicing a governance model.
What is it then?
They are practicing an abdication of responsibility.
Oh, wow.
The law expects you to be active. It expects you to ask uncomfortable questions, demand detailed reports, and verify that management is actually executing the board's directives safely and legally.
I can see how that creates immediate social friction, though. Because a lot of these charities are run by highly charismatic, beloved founders.
Oh, yeah. They're community heroes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you come onto the board and start demanding receipts and questioning their operational decisions, you feel like the bad guy.
You do. The social pressure is to just trust them.
Right.
And that psychological dynamic is precisely why boards get into trouble. Blind trust feels good socially, but legally, it puts you squarely in the crosshairs. Taking a hands-off approach might be exactly what a charismatic founder prefers, but if things go wrong, they are not the only ones on the hook.
So you can't just trust.
No, you cannot simply trust without verification.
And it stops being an abstract conversation about, oversight the second we start talking about money.
Absolutely.
Because financial oversight isn't just about making sure someone isn't literally stealing from the donation box.
Yeah.
It gets incredibly nuanced when you look at conflicts of interest.
It really does.
It's not just about the director directly pocketing money, right?
Right.
It extends to anyone connected to them.
Exactly. When we talk about connected persons, we mean spouses, family members, or private companies that the directors or their families control. In Ontario, for example, the Charities Accounting Act and the Public Guardian and Trustee set incredibly strict rules against this type of financial benefit.
Okay, so to put this in a real-world context, say I'm on the board, we're planning the annual gala,
Sure.
and my husband happens to own a catering company.
I see where this is going.
Even if he comes to the board and says, look, I love the cause, I'll cater the event at a 20% discount. The board might look at that and think, it's a massive win-win. We save money. We get great food.
So it's perfect.
Right. But legally, that is a glaring red flag.
It is a massive red flag. And this is exactly where the corporate rules don't apply to us.
Right.
Mentality just completely fails. In a private business, taking a sweetheart deal from a relative is just smart networking.
Yeah.
But in a charity, it is a direct violation of your fiduciary duty. Violating those rules isn't just an awkward conversation. It can result in personal liability and severe regulatory action. We saw a very sobering reminder of this with the 2020 Chosen People Ministries Canada case. It's a textbook example of what happens when financial controls and conflict of interest policies completely break down. You are the one legally required to watch the money, and you cannot outsource that vigilance.
Wow. Okay, but the part of the financial oversight that really gave me a sobering reality check.
Yeah.
I mean, it entirely flips the script on what it means to be a volunteer.
Oh, the deductions.
Yes. You aren't just giving your time. You're putting your own financial security on the line as collateral. And this happens through a mechanism I want to call the deductions trap.
That's a great name for it.
Because charities, like any other business, have employees. And they collect things like income tax, Canadian pension plan contributions, and employment insurance premiums directly from those employees' paychecks.
Right. And this is the risk that catches well-intentioned people off guard more than any other. Oh, absolutely. It requires understanding exactly why the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, is so aggressive in these situations. When a charity withholds those payroll deductions, or when it collects GST or HST, that money never actually belonged to the charity.
Wait, really?
The law deems that money to be held in trust for the Crown.
Oh, meaning you aren't just paying a vendor bill late. You are legally holding government money.
Exactly.
And if the charity hits a cash crunch, there's a massive temptation for management to look at that bank account and say, let's just use these payroll taxes to keep the lights on this month, and we'll pay the CRA back when the big grant comes in next quarter.
Precisely. And because it is trust money, the protective corporate veil completely vanishes.
What does that mean for the board?
Well, if the charity fails to remit those deductions to the CRA, the volunteer directors can be held personally liable for the unpaid amounts.
Personally?
Yes. The CRA does not view this as a simple corporate debt. They view it as the directors failing to protect money that belonged to the employees and the government.
Okay, wait, let me get this straight. That is a staggering level of exposure.
Huh.
I'm volunteering my time for free to help build, like, a community theater.
Right.
But if our staff accountant, who I barely even know, decides to float the organization's expenses using the payroll tax money, the CRA can legally come after my house. They can freeze my personal bank account.
Yes, they can. And they actively do.
Oh, my God.
And the reality of this gets even harsher. Even if the charity becomes completely insolvent, goes bankrupt and ceases to exist, that specific liability does not disappear for the directors.
So bankruptcy doesn't save you?
Nope. In many well-known examples, the CRA has successfully pursued the personal assets of nonprofit directors long after the organization itself went under. Bankruptcy does not erase the failure to remit trust funds.
And I imagine this is exactly where the school bus analogy comes back to haunt people.
Hmm.
The directors probably show up in court arguing that they had no idea the accountant was doing this. Like they relied entirely on management.
They absolutely try that defense, and the CRA is completely unmoved by it. The law places the ultimate responsibility on you, the director, to ensure those remittances are made. If you do not know, for an absolute fact, whether your charity's source deductions are being remitted on time, you need to find out immediately, like literally this week.
Seriously.
You call the treasurer, you call the executive director, and you demand the actual proof of remittance.
That entirely changes the math on volunteering. I mean, we still desperately need people to serve on these boards because society relies on the work these charities do.
Yeah.
We can't all just resign tomorrow out of fear.
No, definitely not.
So how do we build a wall between our personal assets and the charity's liabilities? The obvious first thought is insurance. You buy a policy and you're protected, right?
Insurance is the crucial first layer of defense, specifically directors and officers liability insurance, commonly known as D&O insurance.
Right.
You need this because even if you make perfectly good faith decisions, and even if you do everything right to the absolute best of your ability, you can still end up in a costly legal dispute.
Like what?
Well, employees sue for wrongful termination. Regulators launch complex investigations. You absolutely need coverage to pay for the legal defense.
But looking into the mechanics of this, having a policy in the filing cabinet doesn't actually mean you are covered, which feels like a terrible trick.
It does. Yeah.
Because in places like Ontario, the Charities Accounting Act has specific rules about this. The charity's governing documents, like the actual legal bylaws, have to expressly authorize the purchase of that insurance.
They must expressly authorize the purchase, and crucially, they must authorize the indemnification of the directors.
Indemnification. So
It means the charity is legally permitted to use its own funds to cover your legal costs and stand behind you if you are sued for doing your job on the board.
Right, and here's where the real-world friction hits. Because I would imagine a huge percentage of charities are operating on, like, boilerplate bylaws that were drafted in 1985 and haven't been legally updated since.
That is incredibly common. The board assumes they're protected because they see a line item for an insurance premium in the annual budget. Sure.
But if those specific indemnification clauses are missing from their ancient governing documents, it is a material risk to every single person sitting around that boardroom table.
Because it invalidates it.
Exactly. A technicality in the bylaws could render your protection completely void, leaving you to pay for your own legal defense out of pocket. Checking the insurance policy is only half the job. You have to verify the legal authority behind it.
Which naturally leads to the issue of who is actually protecting you in a crisis. Let's say a massive conflict of interest arises, or the CRA comes knocking about those payroll taxes.
Right.
My immediate instinct would be to call the charities lawyer and ask them what I should do. But I was looking at the structure of this, and the charities lawyer doesn't actually work for me, do they?
They do not. There is a subtle but massive legal distinction here. The charity's legal counsel works for the corporate entity itself.
Okay.
They represent the organization. They do not represent the individual human beings serving on the board of directors. This makes me think of a very specific and kind of uncomfortable comparison. It's exactly like using your spouse's lawyer in a divorce.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
Right. You sit down in their office, the lawyer's friendly, they've known you for years, so you naturally assume they're looking out for your best interests. But at the end of the day, their fiduciary duty is exclusively to your spouse.
Yep.
If push comes to shove, they're legally obligated to throw you under the bus to protect their actual client.
Exactly. When times are good, the interests of the charity and the interests of the directors are perfectly aligned.
Right.
But the moment they diverge, say, the charity is facing a massive fine and the regulator is looking for someone to blame, the entity's lawyer is going to protect the entity.
Wow.
So if the board finds itself in a high-stakes situation, or if they're contemplating a massive transaction like selling a core piece of real estate, the board needs to retain its own independent legal counsel, a lawyer whose only job is protecting the directors.
I can easily picture the pushback on that in a board meeting, though. Someone raises their hand and says, why are we spending $10,000 of donor money on a second lawyer just for us? Aren't we just being paranoid?
It feels like paranoia when things are calm, but it is the definition of prudent governance when the storm hits. Smart boards understand that protecting the directors from liability is essential to keeping the charity functioning. If the directors are paralyzed by personal legal fears, they cannot govern effectively.
So we have these individual protections, verifying the D&O insurance, updating the bylaws, hiring independent counsel when necessary.
Right.
But individual armor only goes so far. If the structural foundation of the house is rotting, putting on a hard hat won't save you. We need to look at the architecture of the board itself, and it seems the most common yet invisible structural flaw is sheer size.
Yes, it is widely known in governance circles as the board size problem. Charities inherently want to be inclusive. They want to represent every facet of the community, they want all the major donors at the table, and they want diverse perspectives. As a result, you often see boards with 12, 15, sometimes 20 people.
It feels highly democratic. It feels like you're building a coalition.
It feels wonderful socially, but legally, it just expands the target area.
Oh, because of the liability.
Exactly. Every single voting director on that 15-person board carries the exact same full weight of fiduciary responsibility. If the CRA comes looking for $100,000 in unremitted payroll taxes, they don't just go after the treasurer.
Right.
They now have 15 personal bank accounts to target instead of 8. A massive strategic question every charity needs to ask is this: if you can govern effectively and make nimble decisions with a streamlined board of 7 or 8 people, why are you keeping 15 people on the legal hook? Shrinking the board immediately reduces the collective risk footprint of the entire organization.
But practically speaking, how do you actually execute that without causing a massive political fallout?
It's tough.
Because how do you look at 7 powerful, well-connected community leaders who have been volunteering for years and tell them, hey, you're off the board, you risk insulting them, and worse, you risk losing their fundraising power and their Rolodex?
That social friction is exactly why charities hesitate to shrink their boards. They are terrified of alienating their biggest supporters. But this is where the most underused, elegant tool in governance comes in the advisory board.
Ah, because it offers all the prestige without the legal burden.
Exactly. You don't fire your biggest donors, you elevate them. If someone genuinely just wants to lend their credibility, open doors to wealthy networks, or, get their name on that brass plaque in the lobby,
Right.
you appoint them to an exclusive advisory council. Advisory members provide all the brain power and community connection of a director, but because they do not hold a legal vote on corporate matters, they do not carry the corresponding fiduciary liability.
I love the framing of that. It gives them the connections without the crosshairs.
Amazing.
They still get the VIP table at the gala. They still get to advise the CEO over coffee. But when the regulators come knocking, they get to legitimately say, hey, I just advise here. I don't govern.
Yep.
It solves the social problem and the legal problem simultaneously.
Yeah.
But if you shrink the main voting board down to, say, 8 people, those 8 individuals are going to be completely overwhelmed with the actual workload of governance.
They will be, which is why a smaller board absolutely relies on active committees. You can't have 8 people reviewing every single line item of the budget or interviewing every mid-level management hire.
Right.
You distribute the substantive work across focused groups: an audit committee, a governance committee, a fund development committee.
But the catch is, they can't just be committees in name only. They can't just be a monthly group chat where everyone agrees with whatever the chair suggests so they can end the meeting early.
Precisely. Committees are the workhorses of a safe charity. They have to actually do the heavy lifting. They have to stress test the executive director's proposals. They have to apply their specific financial or legal expertise to the problems.
So they're a filter.
Yes, a highly functioning committee does the deep analytical work so that when a proposal finally reaches the full board of 8 people, it has already been thoroughly scrutinized for risks. If your committees only exist on a PowerPoint slide to make the organizational chart look sophisticated, they are just adding bureaucracy without adding any actual legal protection.
Man, this has been a deep, illuminating look at what happens behind the scenes. We've synthesized a pretty intense reality today, and I think the ultimate lesson here is that saying, I volunteer my time, is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Good governance isn't about having a good heart or pure intentions. It is entirely about discipline.
It is the kind of rigorous discipline that separates the charities that survive a sudden crisis from the ones that completely collapse under the pressure. If you are serving on a board, you need practical markers of that discipline in place right now.
Like what?
You need a dedicated legal risk management committee or an audit committee with an explicit mandate to look at liability that actively reviews the organization's exposure.
And you need an annual due diligence checklist. You
Mm.
can't just assume the payroll taxes are being paid. You need to verify it. You
Exactly.
need proper orientation for new directors that actually trains them on their legal duties, rather than just handing them a dusty binder of old meeting minutes and shaking their hand. And, you have to be willing to spend the money on independent legal advice when the waters get choppy.
Taking the charity's mission seriously means taking the legal framework that protects that mission seriously. The rules and the checklists exist to ensure the organization survives to do the work.
As we wrap this up, I'll pass it over to you for one final thought to leave everyone with.
We've spent this entire time talking about formalized charity boards. But think about the other roles in your life where you've casually stepped up just to help out or do a good deed.
Good boy.
Maybe you sit on a local homeowners association board to help manage the neighborhood. Maybe you volunteered to be the treasurer for a local youth sports league, or you help run an informal community action group.
Right.
The legal principles of fiduciary duty, financial oversight, and personal liability do not magically vanish just because the organization is smaller, more localized, or doesn't have a fancy office. Are you currently carrying hidden legal liabilities in those everyday roles simply because you never thought to ask what the law actually expects of you?
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We really appreciate you spending your time with us, getting informed, and learning how to protect yourself while you do good in your community. The next time someone offers you that fancy brass plaque in the lobby, you'll know exactly what questions to ask before you say yes. Stay curious, stay protected, and we'll catch you next time.